Today I would like to talk to you about the wonderful R8. Not the Audi, but the underestimated, underrated and simply misunderstood Rover R8. This is the story on why and how I come to love these cars so much. It's jolly cold. I'm going to get my coat back on actually. These wedge-shaped Rover 200s and 400s came out in 1989 and kind of managed to stay on until 1998 with a variety of different engines such as the 1.4 and the 1.6 K series and the 1.6 Honda D series in single and twin cam variants. Plus there was the 1.8 diesel as well, a turbo diesel, and then my favourite was the 2-litre M series engine, which they bunged a turbo on with that, and then they changed it to the 2-litre T series engine, which wasn't that different really, but they put a turbo on that one as well. I'm not the best person to give a full detailed history on the actual car and all of its engines. This video is really just about my experience with these cars and how I grew to love them so much. Besides my friend's parents having one in about 1992, my first experience was actually in 1995 when my dad, as a company car, was offered either a 418 LSD or a Ford Escort SI. I was really impressed by the build quality of the 418. With just the way the door shuts sounded, and I saw both these cars. I kind of helped talk him into having the Rover because I just couldn't believe the quality of the car compared to the Escort. I mean, the Escort was still a new car and it all felt screwed together and everything, but the Rover, with all of its attention to detail and all the wood cappings and the sill strips that say Rover on, and it was a diesel, and it was the first time I had been in a diesel that had some sort of thump to it. It wasn't the first turbo diesel, obviously, but before that I'd only ever been in diesels that had no turbos and they're just so unbelievably slow. And suddenly there was this one that would want to get going, and I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was a brilliant car. And then in 1998, when I had a job where I needed a very reliable car, I got my first R8, and it was a 1990 H-Reg 416 GTI. And at first I wasn't that mad on it, to be honest, because I was used to the diesel, which had a bit of a thump to it, but the twin cam Honda engine, you really had to rev it, of course, to get it to do anything. And I didn't realise this actually to start with, so I was a little bit disappointed, if I'm absolutely honest. And this is it, my 416 GTI, which I very rarely washed. Had full electrics, front and rear electric windows and air conditioning, leather seats, the whole lot. The 416 GTI was the first car I'd ever had that always worked. It always started when I got into it, and it already had 125,000 miles when I bought it. The only issue was this kind of noisy gearbox, but 40,000 miles I did in that car, and it just carried on working and never ever once gave up on me. And it was with the practicality of the size of the boot and the fact that it was a decent sized saloon car that had enough character about it that maybe go buy another one a few years later. I dabbled about with older cars at the time in the around 2002, I'd say it was. I had a Triumph Dolomite and an old Mercedes, and you used to get too many problems. I needed something reliable again for the job I was doing, and I drew up a list of 10 cars, and the Rover 420 GSI was the one that just seemed to make the most sense. So I went out and I bought one for £420. Sadly, I haven't got a single picture of it. But I do have a picture of this, the car that came afterwards. I enjoyed the 420 so much I bought a 220 GTI, which I had for a couple of years. Sadly, I sold on the 220 GTI rather cheaply because at the time the MOT had run out and I thought the steering rack was goosed on it and it wasn't really worth very much then. Things have changed, haven't they? The 220 GTI was a cracking car. Not only did it look fantastic in red, but it was the first R8 that I had that actually really clung onto the bends because it'd been quite stiff suspension on that. And I remember when my friend and I went up to Macclesfield to buy it, and I got just about a mile down the road when this cat ran out in front of me while I was on a bend, and it stopped, and it wasn't upset by it, so I was quite pleased with that straight away. Going back to that time of around 2002, Rover was, you know, had a bit of a reputation for being unreliable with the K series, and the problem was loads and loads of people really got on board with it, decided that they were nonsense, rubbish, silly cars for people that basically didn't like getting from A to B, and I just didn't really believe it. And there were plenty of people I knew that were going on about how useless they were and stuff, and my brother included, who with his cars he managed to break down an awful lot with, but I didn't. I was never breaking down in Rover. In fact, to this day I've not really found them to be any major issue. They have a couple of things here and there. So it wasn't just the R8s that I was buying. After a while I'd buy any Rover. I'd much prefer a Rover because they were cheaper, they were more interesting than the Fords or Vauxhalls of any other time, and more reliable too. So over the years I've had all of them really, the 25s, 45s, 400s, 200s, 600. I had one 600 once, I really liked it. 75, I've had a few 75s and ZTs and ZRs, and I've got a ZS as well. The only one I've never had is actually the, oh shit, the only one I've never had is the TF or the F, or some of the really old Rovers. Although I did have an SD one once. That wasn't that good actually. Then about 4 years ago I found this Rover Coupe, the 216 Coupe. This was the first coupe I'd actually driven, and I was really surprised by just how eager it was on the bends to just stick on the bends. It was brilliant. I really enjoyed it. But the thing I didn't like was the dashboard, because that's what was missing from the coupe, was this kind of dash. Although on this one obviously there's it's got a plastic insert rather than a wood capping. The car I really wanted though was another 420 GSI, and so I went on the lookout for one, and I found one which I won on eBay, and I had to travel all the way to not Chelms, was it Chelmsford? And on the way back my truck broke down, and I drove around the 420 GSI for quite a while. I really liked it. I would have kept that car forever, basically. I absolutely loved it. Unfortunately, it was taken in the middle of the night by some utter grotty scumbags, and I've never felt so angry in my entire life, because this was probably the earliest GSI going on a J-Reg, and I can't really think of what else to say besides just I still feel quite angry now when I think about it. Anyway, it didn't take me too long before I found myself back in another one, this time a 216 GTI, another Honda twin cam engined car. It was cracking. I bought this car with almost 12 months MOT on it, and I managed to tidy it up a bit, sort some of the paint out, spent ages on the paintwork, making it look as good as possible, getting some new wheels for it, and it never spent a night outside the lockup, except for when I went on holiday in it, because I was just too afraid of somebody coming along and nicking it, basically. And again, you know, I didn't really want to get rid of this car, but needs must, and I had it for sale and somebody came along and bought it. But it's good that it went along to another enthusiast. And now we're back to the car started with, the car I call Project Barry, which I bought with a missing clutch, a clutch that wasn't working anyway, and spent a few days sorting it out. Should have taken me a lot less, but then I'm not an experienced mechanic or anything. And this is a cracking little car. And that would conclude my R8 story, except I do have this one for sale as well. As much as I like it, the basic model isn't really for me. I do want the more potent engine. My favourite being the M series 2-litre engine with all the wood bits on it. Not too bothered about electric windows at the back or anything, but I do want a bit of get up and go, and unfortunately this one doesn't really have quite enough of it. As an afterthought, it's amazing the amount of people that actually believe that the head gaskets on even the wedge shape 2 and 400s are, you know, this thing that breaks every time you go out for a drive anywhere. And why it's become such a misconception, it's how this misconception's come about to such magnitude is beyond really sense. It really is. There's you know, up until fairly recently there were still loads of these R8s knocking about. They certainly outlasted the Escorts and the Astras of the day, particularly the Escorts. Obviously they have a few issues with them, but everything does. But most of it works really very well indeed, and they carried on working. I remember thinking at the time, about 2005 or so, how cheaply you could pick up one of these because of this misconception, just how good they were for the money. And now they're going up in value quite a lot.